we just catapulted, right, in terms of our sales in the earliest days. And it was around this time when we were approached by Shark Tank. We decided, okay, let's give it a go.
Welcome to Not Another CEO podcast. I'm your host, David Politis. Every week, we talk to inspiring leaders and get the true stories, the ups and downs, the lessons learned, and come away with actionable advice for our own journeys. Today's guest is Betsy Fore. Betsy is a serial entrepreneur and impact investor. She started a number of companies and nonprofits. She's the co-founder and former CEO of Tiny Organics, a venture-backed company creating whole food meals for babies and toddlers. Notably, Betsy became the first Native American woman to raise a Series A round of funding. She now leads Velveteen Ventures as founding partner and managing director, a firm investing in solutions for children and the planet. Betsy is also releasing her debut book, Built on Purpose: Discover Your Deep Inner Why and Manifest the Business of Your Dreams, set to publish 1 week from today on November 11th. Please join me in welcoming Betsy Fore.
Thank you, David. I'm so excited to be here.
Thank you for doing this with me early in the morning for you on the West Coast. So thank you for doing this. Let's jump in. First question. What is the one thing that you did at Tiny Organics, big or small, that had the biggest impact and you do again if you're CEO of another company in the future?
Our 100 first believers, or as I called them, our 100 founding families. So we built the entire company with them. I was actually a new mom at the time myself, and it was pre-pandemic in Park Slope, Brooklyn. I sent one email out to the Park Slope parent group. We got hundreds of inbound in the first few hours. We then had to cap it to try to deliver the food to these families. But what we did through that journey was meet the mom or the dad where they were, right? So we went into the home. We tried 12 different recipes of each one of our hero products that we launched with. And we essentially built Tiny Organics with our 100 founding families. And I talk about it a lot in my book, which you mentioned as well, David. That was the secret sauce, right? We were meeting the parent where they were when they needed us the most.
Just to be clear, you're saying you went into a group, sent out a message to the local parents, and what did you
Yes.
say? Like you said, we're starting a company, or we're trying. Like what did you say to everyone?
Baby food company seeking founding families, essentially as co-founders, right? And I was able to say VC backed, right? Because we were already building within a venture studio in New York. I built that company completely different than my first, which I'm sure we'll get into, where I built it solely with angels. And so I did exactly the opposite with Tiny. And we did have that bandwidth to be able to say, we're going to learn, right, for the first year on making sure these products are what baby needs during each phase of development. But just getting to know these families by name, doing all the surveys with them, going into their homes. I mean, babies are the best beta testers, right? Because they can't lie. It's like, you know exactly if they love it or if they're doing it and what. And so, for us, it was really, this idea that the first 100 were so obsessed, right? That's what we were focused on. They were so in love, or what I call the product market love fit and journey, that they then told 10 of their friends, who told 10 of their friends, right? And it just grew from there to where I built the company to over 13 million in revenue on direct sales alone in the first 24 months. And then went on, as you mentioned, to be the first Native American to ever raise a Series A round of funding. I think so much of that was because of this exponential growth we saw, meeting our consumer where they were, really making them a co-founder in the company and building with us.
And so I want to get super tactical, because this is actually something that I talk to founders about all the time, where I say that first set of customers that you work with in the tech world, you would say the design partners, the beta testers or whatever it is, they can have such a lasting impact, good or bad, by the way, depending on the experience that they have. And you spending that time with them, it compounds, like the value that they can bring to your company and the impact that they can have. How did you keep them let's abreast of what was happening in the company or things that were coming out? Like, did you have an email list of just those 100 that stayed with just those 100 the whole time that you were building the company? Was it just in those early? Again, I want to get this to me. I love when you first told it to me. I was like, I love this. How did you keep that group engaged?
Yes. So initially it was through sending these emails for them to come and meet us in at Prospect Park. And I lived around the corner. So these moms were my neighbors, right? And I was very heavily pregnant with my first at the time. I then gave birth and brought my brand new baby boy to meet everyone. So there was this level, it was pre-pandemic, there was a level of trust there as a new mom, right? But also I think it put more confidence in these founding families because they knew we were building out of a VC firm in Manhattan, but also we were able to we were really like the moms doing the thing, right? And feeding this to our kids. And so the cadence at which we did it was every other week initially, where we would meet the families in the park. We would then gift them the hero products, right? They would bring it home and try. They would fill out the surveys. We did have drop off, of course, as you would expect. So I think we actually wound up with like 125 families that we started out with, right? And then it sort of came down to the 100 where we knew their kids by name. And eventually, with this type of business, you do age out. So many of them did have another child, and we were able to join them in that journey. Actually, all three of my children have eaten tiny growing up and have they really do love vegetables, and I believe because of this. And so I think, we were able to, just meet them where they were and continued that cadence until the pandemic hit. Actually, we were able to kind of continue to meet with them, continue to test with them. And then it became, instead of physically meeting in the park, just shipping them, right? We were making it, in Harlem at a little at Hot Bread Kitchen. That was our very first manufacturing site, and then we eventually moved into the Roberta's Pizza kitchen in Brooklyn, like that space where they had this massive brick oven. I mean, it was so cool. That's when I knew we'd made it, right? If we were like working out of their space. But that whole journey in the earliest days never had a co-man. So we were doing all everything, the quality control. And of course, for babies, this meant partnering with folks like that I had brought on from day one, which was like Dariush Masafarian at Tufts, ensuring that this was exactly what baby needed when during each phase of development, right? We then caught the attention of the former First Lady, Michelle Obama, who was about to launch her Veggies Early and Often campaign since founding it in the White House a decade prior. And we were the perfect fit for her program and to be a founding board member of that, because that was our exact stance on what we were trying to deliver here, to rewire the gut health of a generation to prefer vegetables over sweets, essentially, or the way that I had grown up, right? And so I think we had so many key insights, but there were all these hypotheses that we were trying to test out, and we did that with the founding families, right? So they actually, they got a certificate saying they were a founding family. We never dished out equity, but we didn't need to because they had such a love for the product, given the love for their baby, and there was a deep need there that we were meeting.
So let's compare this. You mentioned to your first company. Can you talk a little bit about how you did it differently and what didn't work with that first company, in this particular area?
Yeah. And that company was actually a hardware company that I built for my first baby, my dog Whiskey. It was the first Fitbits for dogs on the market. This was early 2010s. Whistle and I launched around the same time. My product was Wonder Wolf. I thought we were living the dream because I launched us in every major retailer, had millions of dollars in POs from Petco launching the pet tech category across all of the US. I initially launched in Harrods in London, where I was based at the time. Went down to Colette for Paris Fashion Week. We went to Manhattan to go to Story, Bloomingdale's, and then was doing the things that kind of do not scale right during that time with these sort of one-off retailers. But then I hit every Best Buy in North America with the product in a massive point of sale display. And I thought, this is it, right? I actually took my dog in the car with me driving around Canada to the different Best Buys to meet with the sales rep. I mean, totally doing things that do not scale here, right? And saying this dog inspired it, right? And so I had the belief of these B2B customers to the point, as I mentioned, millions of dollars in purchase orders, these massive displays. They were putting marketing budget behind it and everything else. But what I hadn't done yet, and as a first-time founder at the time had not realized, was that I actually wasn't meeting the consumer where they needed us or where they were at, right? Because we were a first of a kind in pet tech. People were just getting used to wearing a Fitbit for themselves. And they couldn't quite translate, what does this actually do for my dog, right? Yes, it counts its steps, but we were getting to a point where we could track if they were sleeping or even dreaming. And then, had the dog walker taken them, where did they go? And there were all these different key insights based on your dog's makeup, right? Like their what they might need for exercise. And it was really to get my dog down to his goal weight. And I just thought by putting that story out there that people would get it or understand, or it might click. But we weren't sort of meeting them with something that they already understood in a way that we could. For instance, I'll give you an example. New moms are used to reaching into the freezer where they store their breast milk, right, to warm that for baby. That's a behavior that we then just leaned into at Tiny because we got a lot of pushback. Wait a minute, your food is frozen. And then we were able to say that's even more fresh, right? Because you've, just like the milk, been able to capture it at the source at the very start. And so we were leaning into behavior that the mom was already doing by reaching in to get that for baby. We weren't leaning into a behavior that made sense, right? With dogs at the time, it was a little bow tie device that attached to their collar. And so it was like too big of a leap for people. There was like this educational piece that was missing. We were almost a little too early. And because of that, didn't have great sell through, right, at the at the retail level. And at the time, I had launched D2C. It was very early days for D2C and consumer at the time. And so I thought I need to do both, right? There were so many learnings that I had as a first time sole founder CEO at that company. We actually did go on to get Oprah's favorite things list. She was using the bow tie with her dogs, which was like a dream. It's great to see. And I was able to get Forbes 30 under 30 for manufacturing. Still have no idea how that happened. But they, had heard of me, and you'll hear more as we dive into this, David, with my background here, why this is kind of so amazing that I was able to even sell in these large retailers. I started my entire journey with a 50K grant. And so that was another thing I did so differently from Tiny, where I actually wound up raising from angel investors only, like exclusively for that company. And what it meant was, for a hardware company that requires quite a bit of overhead, right, to manufacture these devices. And we built everything in house. At the time, you couldn't even buy anything off the shelf. You had to do it yourself. So the firmware and the iOS and Android apps and everything. So we were, pretty big team across 3 continents. And trying to scale that without being VC backed at the time was near impossible, right? So I was also, I didn't understand, or what I was learning through that journey as well, where the funding source should come from. And that if you exclusively raise from individuals, it's very hard to then validate your valuation, right, for an institutional investor down the line.
Interesting. And the lesson there, you got the retailers excited and you did all those things, but you hadn't yet figured out that product market fit with the end buyer, that end consumer. And that was really and I can fully get the idea that in Tiny Organics, once you get that product market fit and you know that this is something the consumer wants, it becomes even easier to go not only to the retailers, but even to drive the sell through and everything else. So I wanted to, you mentioned fundraising a couple times. I want to talk a little bit about the fundraising path that you took. One of the things that we've talked about, and I think you may be maybe the second person that I've had on the show that had some experience with Shark Tank, but your Shark Tank experience definitely is unique, I would say. And so maybe you can share a little bit about where that was in the journey, just timeline wise, and where it was in the world, what was happening in the world, and kind of how that happened. And then we'll get to how you actually ended up raising, but I would love to hear that story.
Yes, absolutely. And when we launched Tiny Organics, it was January 2020. So we were ready to go, right? We met mom where she needed us, when she needed us most, with the pandemic hitting in March. We were actually supposed to be on stage with Michelle Obama in March 2020 in Chicago to kick off our partnership. Of course, that had to be all virtual at that point, right? But it meant that because we were delivering frozen, because mom didn't have to go to the grocery store. We just catapulted, right, in terms of our sales in the earliest days. And it was around this time when we were approached by Shark Tank. We decided, okay, let's give it a go. And so that summer, before we'd figured out any sort of vaccines yet or anything, and my son was still, I had never really left him yet at the time. I had to quarantine. I drove cross country to Vegas. That's where they relocated us to do this one for that season. And I was quarantined for over 2 weeks, where I didn't see anyone in a hotel, right? Like, and then when they bring you into the tank, they wanted to know that you know, hadn't been exposed to anything, and you wore a mask until you were like entering the tank. But when I got there, I realized, all of the details that we had given for thawing our food, the Tiny Organics food itself, had not been followed, and it was still frozen. And so we were like, "How are the sharks going to eat this food if it's like a solid, you know, rock of ice?" And at that moment, you're sort of thinking. It was right before I was walking into the tank. You know, I was removing the mask, and all I could do at that point was my box breath, was coming back to my breath and trying to stabilize my nervous system, right? To be able to walk in there and do the thing. I can say this because we were on the introduction of the season itself, where they showed my COO and I walking into the tank with Tiny Organics there and like the brand, but they actually didn't air us. So even though the sharks were vying for a deal with us, I was able to negotiate really well, and we were thrilled with the outcome, to the point where the shark was jumping up and down on their chair. Like, it was incredible. They still did not air us. So I think, you know, that whole experience, I mean, now I guess, you know, the thing that I've learned in life, and what I've always tried to do, is the reframe, right? So it's like, okay, there's still lessons and learnings from that experience. And one of them was, this, you know, fight or flight mode that founders often get into, where they're just putting out fires and trying to, trying to build as fast as they can, right? I think I was able to really understand that I had to come back to myself and to the mindfulness practices, right, that I knew, and honestly, the values driven approach that I was raised with, and wanted to gift to others, because I understood kind of this deep meaning behind it, as a Native American person, right? I'm Turtle Mountain Chippewa, and so our laws, as we call them, are our 7 grandfather teachings of the Anishinaabe, which are things like truth, love, humility, bravery. We really try to live by these things, and I thought, okay, there's these moments where, in your founder journey, where it feels like failure almost every day, right? How can we as founders actually sustain ourselves through that and drive forward with a purpose, and a sense of your responsibility? You're doing something greater than yourself, and essentially trying to have a fulfilled life. I think there's been so many points in my journey that from the outside looks like, okay, that's how could that not be a failure, right? But you can actually use it for your greatest good. And I think that's, you know, everything I talk about in the book, that I know we'll get into it in a bit as well.
Yeah. I mean, I would be so angry if that happened. Like, if I went and quarantined for 2 weeks and got in there and pitched, which I'm sure was I mean, I can't even, I would be so nervous. I mean, I would be so angry. I would literally, because of course, again, obviously I haven't done that, but I've had some things where I've been featured in, you know, the New York Times, for example. And it's like, I did the interview 6 months before the article came out. And the whole time, is it going to be this week? Is it going to be this week? It never came, you know? And I can only imagine, because the impact that would have on the business, obviously the business did well and scaled, but the impact that would have had would have been, I mean, crazy.
And to work with that shark that we actually did the deal with, right? And stuff too, because you don't do that if you don't if you don't air. So yeah.
But you did raise Series A, and you raised a good amount of money, and can you talk about what that fundraising process, the more, let's call it, kind of traditional, you know, venture fundraising process? Because I have raised a lot of money, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in my career, and I don't think, I know that my experience is probably very different from the experience that you face for a whole host of reasons. And I've had a couple of women on the show who have talked about how hard fundraising has been. and some of the stuff they told me, some of the stuff they told me on the show, and sometimes they told me after the show, but some of the stuff that they've experienced is honestly crazy. Like I can't imagine what. So can you talk about maybe what that experience was like? Was that how did you get in front of these VCs? Did you get the first offer, the first person you pitched? How many no's did you get? Can you share a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, absolutely. And it did start with that 50K grant for my first company. So even though prior to that, I had built with the founder of Calm, the meditation app, his previous company, Mind Candy in London, to wild success. We were the darlings of Silicon Roundabout in London at the time, where we had built Moshi Monsters. I grew it with him to over 80 million registered users online. We then were the number one toy brand in all of UK for 6 years on. And it was like so incredible, beating even Lego and Star Wars. I was a toy inventor right after university. And so that's kind of how I was able to fly out there and convince him that we need to do this and build a physical franchise around his like up and coming digital brand. But this has now been like 2 decades on, and he's been a mentor, and seeing him build and raise venture funding. And as a sole founder at the time, I thought maybe I could do this too. And I had the idea for my dog to help him lose weight, right? I just wanted to build it for him originally. And then it wound up that I thought, okay, I'm going to try to give this a go, right? And as he was leaving to build Calm, I then left to build my company Wondermento, which our first product was Wonderwoof. In so many ways, in terms of being a first time founder CEO, I so this must be success, right? This is what it looks like. Like you're getting all this sell through, all this momentum. But where I didn't know what to do or where to start was with the funding. So I'd seen Michael raise funding as mentioned, but I'd never done that myself at all. When I was growing up, the entrepreneur that I saw was my uncle's store on our reservation. He owns Azure's Auto Body. And I thought, okay, he's charted a course for his life, right? Built this business that's still going today. And, maybe I could do that too. So I did have these entrepreneurs in my family where I thought, okay, that's super inspiring. But we didn't have a kind of friends and family around, or even know that someone could pay you to build an idea, right? Or anything like that. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to try to apply for grants because I didn't, I was trying to network in the London scene at the time, but hardware was just so new, and especially in the pet space, there was no one yet, and so it was very difficult to raise. And when I went to the U.S., I applied for something called an Arch grant in St. Louis. And I got it, the 50K grant. But on that, those judges were actually Maxine Clark, CEO and founder of Build-A-Bear, which as a former toy inventor, I was like, oh my goodness, this is phenomenal. And then Jim McKelvey, who was the co-founder of Square with Jack Dorsey. And so when they were my judges and decided to, come in through the grant, they actually invested themselves and then opened up their networks, right? So I found that if you're a first time founder, that trying to have that sort of snowball effect of the introduction from one investor to another is how I got there. And I sort of pieced it together, as I mentioned, where I was able to piece it together enough to get these massive POs and deliver on them and, update the hardware and the apps and everything else. But once we got to a certain scale, I then couldn't get there, as mentioned, without the venture capital. So even though we technically exited that company, right, and I was able to remain on the board of another pet company that the data went with, the product itself does not exist today. And I think when I was then deciding, okay, what's next? I was pregnant at the time with my first, as mentioned, and I thought, what's the greatest gift I could give my son outside of my love? It's probably a love of vegetables from the very first bites, considering how I was raised on kind of like a sugar roller coaster of sorts. And I found that that really resonated with people. I mean, there's when it comes to investors, you do want to be able to connect with them on a level, right, where they feel like they're providing a lot of value too. But I think even if we don't have children, everyone's been a child. Same with dogs. Even if you don't have one, you understand what that feeling is, right? And that connection. And so those were things that really served me in the journey, right? To be able to find that human connection with investors. And the way I did it on my second company, Unaired Organics, was to become an EIR, an entrepreneur in residence. So I definitely went about it a different way, where I interviewed many firms throughout New York, and then and decided to move forward with Human Ventures. I think you're also, friends with there, David, in New York. And I from there was able to have that sort of almost year-long process of really discovering and meeting that deep need within the 100 founding families, right? Because I had that kind of launch pad for myself, having founded something prior, right? Like being able to come in and say, okay, I'm going to do this again, but from a different perspective with with the VC dollars. And then my first outside funding that I was able to bring in was Will from Elizabeth Street Ventures, and he's actually still he's on my advisory board for my fund to this day. And it was on my board and everything. It was a game changer, right? Because in consumer, he's made some of the best bets, had the biggest exits. So I think when you are able to align yourself with people who really like deeply understand and have seen success within your industry from the very jump, then that can make all the difference for validating it for other venture capitalists down the line, right? So again, it was kind of this snowball effect that, of course, once we had done in the first 24 months, 13 million in revenue, it was much easier because the metrics spoke for themselves, right? At the Series A level, that I was able to raise eventually in combined venture dollars over 20 million. And I think, before I even left the company, I did another round just prior, because, that kind of brings us up to the point where I realized, wait a minute, in my legacy work and this work that I do in life, for how I'm going to be able to give back to my community, and really use these skills that I've learned, right, for the good of Indian country in many ways, and with my Native American relatives and community, I wanted to start a nonprofit. And so I thought, maybe I could remain on the board of Tiny and then be able to still do this thing where I can feel like I'm making a huge impact, right? Because I think as a founder, and we kind of touched on this, David, I know we've chatted about it previously as well. You feel like you identify yourself with your company. And then I think once you sort of built so many companies, you realize, or even once you actually have babies for yourself, you're like, well, that wasn't really my baby, right? Like that wasn't really, and when you can start to view your companies as a work of art, right? Like it's a canvas that you've painted, but it's not you. It's an expression. It's a symbol, right? It's something out there that's meant to be helpful or someone can learn from and project on, or even feel like it's part of them as well. As soon as you can do that, and I'm a very visual person, so for me it like was very helpful to when my executive coach kind of took me through this years ago, right, to make me really understand, like, I am not Tiny Organics, I am not Wonder Wolf, I am not it's and then that's when I had this kind of aha moment of, okay, I'm going to figure out how to give back, how to build for community, how to create the greatest ripple in this one precious life. And I did that through founding a nonprofit called Natives Rising, where we're now the largest community of Native founders and technologists, with our members representing over 100 tribes. My co-founder is Pomo, so her homelands are literally SF, in Silicon Valley, where I am now. She built at Facebook at the time as one of the first product designers there, to build the indigenous community, and then and then went over to the top other tech firms to do so and replicate that model. I then joined forces with her because she was a bit of a legend, right? We met in the MIT Indigenous Women in STEM events. I joined forces with her to then launch this together after we did powwow together one year. And it was such an awakening because through this work, I actually became an NLP practitioner, neurolinguistics programming, which literally helps you rewire your brain through science, right? And through these processes and practices, to get out of the negative loop or the fight or flight, or what we talked about, kind of putting out the fires as a founder, and into the positive mode and the reframe, right, around your life, but ultimately showing yourself compassion. And I think because Danielle and I, my co-founder, had healed ourselves in this work, we were then able to help and heal others as well through that. So we hold healing retreats, and it's just been such a labor of love. And I'm now on the board of that nonprofit, because I've been investing for the past 6 to 7 years now out of 2 different funds into women and underrepresented founders. One is X Factor Ventures, where we backed over 100 female-led seed rounds in the nation. And that's been, incredible. We're on our 3rd fund, 23 of us partners who are all Series A and beyond founders ourselves. And then when I moved from New York to Chicago, I joined a firm called Long Jump that has written the most pre-seed checks to underrepresented Chicago Chicago founders. So we've done almost 50 deals now. And I was able to build a track record to then launch my venture capital firm, which I know we're going to get into here in a moment as well.
One of the things that you said there that I want to focus on, I never actually heard someone describe building. I've always said the company is kind of like your child, that's what I feel. And it is so much of who you are. And I don't even think, my strong opinion is I'm not sure that founders can go from zero to something without the company being everything in their life, and in your example, right, when you're having your first child and you're starting Tiny Organics and you're literally going to the park and meeting the families and going to their houses and I'm sure it was everything in your life at that moment, leaving your child to go to Shark Tank and like it's everything to you and it's your whole person. But no one's ever described it to me actually as something, the canvas that you're painting on, that's an interesting way of thinking about it. And it's an expression, of, I still don't know how you could separate in the early days. I don't know how you can separate, but as you start to transition out, I've talked to, I don't know, 30 founders on here that are former CEOs and have now left their companies or sold their companies or whatever. And so many of them talk about how hard it is to make that transition. But this is actually an interesting way of looking at it, through kind of a different light. So I want to, there's a lot to cover. We don't have so much time. The one thing I want to talk about here for a second is can you talk a little bit about Built on Purpose and talk a little bit about the book and why you have so much going on between all the various companies and the investing. And I have written a book, not mine was about how to manage SaaS applications, so that, but it was, a couple hundred pages, and it was I wrote 2 different books, and it's a lot of work to do that. And I'm curious, what drove you to write the book, and what is the book about? And I think most of the stuff we've been talking about is probably in there, but what can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, definitely. And you're absolutely right. It took over 5 years to write this book. So the first time I had the idea for it, I was sitting in a London cafe with Michael, with the founder of Calm, my ex-boss, and I said to him, "What you've done for meditation by making it less woo and more accessible to people, I want to do for manifestation, because I believe that we all have a creator spirit in us that's just waiting and willing to be unleashed, and that actually founders are the ultimate manifestors, right? We create something out of nothing. Like our deck is our vision board, right? And we believe it. We believe it to a fault, right? That this thing is already realized, like it's going to happen. That can be replicated. These things can be learned, right? And I believe that anyone can tap into that. And so it was trying to bring this access to others who maybe haven't had that opportunity previously, or even known, where do I start? Like, what is my purpose? And so you mentioned it earlier, but the subtitle is Discover Your Deep Inner Why and Manifest the Business of Your Dreams. So I really take the reader through discovering your deep inner why from a values-driven approach. So I include the grandfather teachings from my tribe, but also 40 other value sets within the book, where you go through these exercises to discover what are my top 5, and then truly embodying those feelings within yourself. And so through the neurolinguistics programming work that I've done, I weave these spiritual practices into the nuts and bolts of building a business. And I do it through my own journey. And then I interview 26 other founders. Some have IPO'd, some are double unicorns, but over half are women and a third are Native American. So I'm really excited to bring these perspectives to market. And the biggest learning in my journey that I wanted to give as the gift here is the idea that we can have a calm nervous system as founders, that we can come from a place of really peace and like fulfillment, that is sustainable. That's sustainable success, right? And ultimately everything ends, right? Change is the only constant in life. So if you can find your home and your peace within yourself, no one can take that away from you, right? So I think trying to help founders understand this idea of the canvas, like we talked about, David, this idea that it's something outside of you, and yet you can pour all of your love and energy and attention into this thing, and especially during a period of your life, right? It's just like in your reference it too, just like a child. Eventually, one day you have to just like set them free, right? And so I think I think that, I talk about this in the book, and there's 4 different sections. And the last one really speaks to this, is how do you live sustainably, in a way that really honors who you are, right? And that the most important relationship you'll ever have with a founder is actually not with your co-founder, it's with yourself. Right. And if you can dig into that and the knowingness of where you stand on the values, spectrum, and how you're incorporating those into your decisions, and then using these tools that I teach throughout the book to kind of get you there and bring you back home to that place. I think that's where we can really see people thriving from this space of abundance, right? And coming out of that sort of fight or flight or scarcity mode, into a place that truly serves and honors who they are.
Mm. Uh, I know this is going to be a hard question to answer, but of those interviews that you did, because I can only imagine probably some very impressive people on that list, what was your favorite interview? What was the conversation that maybe someone said something the most surprising, that really opened your mind to something? Because you probably had some amazing people. So,
I don't even have to think about this one, David. I told her when we had the interview as well that Bobby Ray Sett, the founder of Virtual Gurus, who was the first Native woman to raise a Series B, actually, round of funding, right? So she went beyond the A as well. But she came from a community, I was just in, actually, up in Canada yesterday, where she was, just like me, first in her family to go to college, right? But she created something based on her value set, and that, and I won't give too much away because it's all in the book there, but where you would never have expected her to kind of build this thing, right? That she did it out of a deep need and alignment within herself. She had so many incredible insights from scaling a company to this size. I'm just trying to think of a couple that I could pull out right now for you. But I would definitely say her interview was one that was like so incredibly inspiring, and just like against all odds, right? To get there. Of course, I absolutely loved interviewing my former boss, Michael, right? And his story is weaved in through the whole book, because he, when I'd first seen a YouTube video of him before I'd ever even been to London, and decided to fly out there, he was building something called Perplexity. And I thought, whatever this guy is selling, like, he's the next Branson, like, it's going to go to the moon, right? And it wasn't actually that one that made it. He had to pivot that company into Mind Candy, into Moshi Monsters, into what we wound up building together after that. And in many ways, you could say Moshi was like a massive success, right? But he believes that everything was building up to Calm, to what he then wound up doing after. And so it was all driven by that deep inner why and those values, the same way it was in Bobby's journey as well. And I think many surprising, like, twists and turns thrown in there too. But just, yeah, some incredible learnings. And I do get really tactical in the book around the nuts and bolts of actually building a company as well, but doing it through this sort of purpose-driven and spiritual lens.
and in terms of Velveteen, this venture fund that you started, another thing where, I think going from being an operator to being an investor is, it's pretty big change, in a lot of ways. And what inspired you? I know you mentioned X Factor, and you mentioned the other fund that you're working with in Chicago. Like, what inspired you to start your own fund?
Mm. Yeah, it really got to a place, I think, like many founders feel, where it was like, if it's not me, who? Like, I have to do this work, right? Like, my soul longs to do this. Like, this is something where I partnered with one of the only other Native women to be an asset allocator throughout her whole career. Actually, she grew up in rural Alaska. Her name's Carla Brolier, where she saw the permafrost melting firsthand. She then built 7 climate funds, most recently for Yvonne Chouinard of Patagonia, who had seen her speak at New York Climate Week and said, "Carla, I'm thinking of giving all my revenue from Patagonia, the clothing company, to the earth. Can you help me figure out what that looks like, how we do that together?" So she built the Patagonia Purpose Trust and then spun out the Home Planet Fund, which deploys all the revenue to Indigenous communities worldwide. I had started a group with her many years ago with Valerie Redhorse called Native Women Asset Managers. And I'll never forget, on a retreat one year, we were driving up the California coast, and she was at Patagonia at the time. I was still investing and working at my nonprofit. And we said, this idea that I had to build a venture fund based on my background in the children's space, what if her and I joined forces in this work and made an even greater impact together, bringing these new perspectives to the market that really haven't been at the table. And investing in people that experience the problem firsthand, right? That are solving for those problems and building the solutions. And the rest is kind of history, where it was like fireworks. We were able to join forces in this way. We now invest in mainly healthcare and climate, and also as it pertains to children, right? Within the consumer and community verticals, and mainly pediatric space as well. We are an ROI driven, like proper venture fund. So we're not an impact fund. However, the way that Carla and I weave impact into the foundation of the firm is that a portion of our carry goes directly back to tribes. And so we are planning to make a massive impact for our communities, and doing this in a way where it weaves in our values at the very core. We'd never seen this done before. We got creative around how we were building the firm itself, and we plan on making sure that we're creating generational wealth for the next 7 generations for our communities.
So, let's talk a little bit about your background. You've mentioned it now a number of times and the story, but where are you from originally?
Yeah, so I'm from a little village of less than 1,000 people in very rural Illinois, where I would make the 17-hour drive every year multiple times to go visit my reservation in North Dakota on the Canadian border. I'm Turtle Mountain, Chippewa, and my family is still there. I grew up between these two worlds of, very sheltered, essentially, like this country girl at heart. The first city I ever visited was Chicago at the age of 17, where I really spent time there, and then wound up going to university there, as I mentioned, studying industrial design and becoming a toy inventor originally. I actually thought, because I grew up in the garage tinkering and building motorcycles with my dad, who's a motocross racer, that I would build motorcycles for Harley Davidson. That was kind of the dream and Buell at the time. And I was like, and it's so interesting, David, because the dreams, when you go out there and start to live it, it's like they just get bigger and bigger. But that's like the beauty of when you can live in the dream realized. You realize that it's beyond your wildest dreams, actually, what you're living in. Because I could never have fathomed where I am today, right? But when I became a toy inventor, I was like, it doesn't get better than this. Like, I thought that during every point in my journey, right? Like, that I'm like, this is literally mean I get to play for a living, right? And never have to grow up. And I was able to invent toys for Mattel, for Hasbro, from Spin Master. And I learned what it meant to fail quickly and approach each new idea with that same enthusiasm. Like, so many startup learnings from the earliest days there in the toy invention world. And then that's what gave me the confidence of the toy inventor to then approach Michael, who I had never even, nobody in my family had been abroad before. And I flew out there not knowing anyone, and walked into our old offices in Battersea and said, I'm here to meet with Michael. I have my massive portfolio in hand with these foam core mock-ups that I'd made in my $400 a month garden apartment in Chicago at the time, right? So I'd flown out with this thing and said to him, I want to meet with Michael. I mean, it was when I finally got to meet with him, it was like the 5th time. And when I walked in, I was able to chat with him for over 2 hours. He hired me on the spot. The rest is history, like we've talked about here, right? It really catapulted everything for me in terms of, that international experience, but really the startup experience. It gave me the wings to believe that I could, also become a founder. And now it's going on 2 decades of friendship and mentorship. After he had went on to build Com as well. So I think, for me, it was every point in my journey, I've had these incredible mentors, and I'm really feel I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, right? That got me here. And so I think one of the very first things I do, or I coach my founders in, that I invest in, is to create a stacked advisory board from day one. And that's something I did even with my firm, my Velveteen Ventures. I was able to, even before we brought on all our LPs and the institutional funding, I brought around just this incredible group of advisors and really earliest believers as well, right? But that fit within all the verticals that we're investing in. And I think for a founder, that means like looking at, okay, marketing, product, social impact, right? Making sure that you have that sort of wish list of advisors for each of these categories stacked within your world. And that can happen even pre-revenue. That can happen, pre-funding, that you get these believers around you to do the thing. So let that be like an initial step. Once you have your idea, you have the passion, you've created the MVP, and you're trying to, kind of monitor and get some data out there. It's like get other believers excited that are on your wish list and dream super big, right? Because that's what got me here. It's all of those folks that believed in me, right, along the journey.
What do your what does your family think about what you've been able to achieve?
Yeah, I think I dedicate the book to my family. I think that, I I write in the dedication for my ancestors to our wildest dreams, right? So I do believe I do believe that it is an answer to their prayers, right? That what I'm doing today, that it's a responsibility and that I carry with me, right? That it's something so much bigger than myself, and that's yeah, for me, they know that everything I've built has been out of love, right? And this love that I have for family, and so in that way it makes sense. But it's yeah, it's every day it's just like better than I could have imagined.
I mean, it's amazing. From one generation, we talked about this when we first met. I recently had took my family to Greece and saw where my father was born, grew up, and kind of the amazing thing of what one generation, how much can change in that period. And I mean, from what you've told me about your family, even more, there's what you've been able to do is really it is truly amazing. Um,
Thank you so much, David. Yeah, and I was so inspired to hear your story as well and those humble beginnings. It really resonated with me because I am literally the first generation to not go to residential school, which I think most Americans don't even have a concept of what that entailed, right? And it meant being completely stripped of every tradition that you held. Even your hair was cut, right? You couldn't be native, and so I think the fact that, I'm the first generation that can feel like we are claiming back our traditions. We are native and we are still here, right? The idea that we were going to be annihilated or that there would be, no more Native Americans left. It's like, that is just not true, right? And we are still here. We're going to empower, and Natives Rising really embodies that spirit yeah, the kind of courage that I think it takes to say, we will not kind of fall into the background anymore. We are actually going to stand up for our values and empower one another and try to be the example, right? And I think that, yeah, in so many ways, it's just been amazing to get to experience the journey of seeing natives thriving in this way, right, in my community. And I think yeah, it's been probably the greatest one of the greatest joys of my life, definitely.
yeah. Well, I mean, I think you've mentioned it now a couple different times with different examples, but I've heard this in countless interviews where founders can point to a person that they saw do it that made them believe that they could do it. And it sounds like you've had a couple, from your uncles, auto shop to Michael and to Com, and and I think I'm going to assume that there's a whole slew and generation of people who are going to see this and see your experience and read your book and all that will feel that same way. And it is kind of amazing because that one person, you've said it again, I've had literally countless people say this to me, that one person was that catalyzing moment where they said, oh, if they can do it, then I can do it. If I, by watching them or by being with them, by working with them, it's amazing. Last question for you. Knowing everything you know today and all the experiences that you've had in your career, what is the only one piece of advice that you would go back and give yourself at the very beginning of your career?
I believe it's what I touched on earlier, David, where I had always thought, because relationships are everything, right? When it comes to founding a company, when it comes to building a company, or even selling your product, I think the most important relationship you can have is with yourself. And when you can truly understand that and spend the quiet time necessary in the same way you would showing, love or compassion to your founding team, right? Showing that to yourself, that will take you so far, because then you have abundance that overflows for others. And I think it's something that in such a noisy world where we're told, okay, got to do this, got to do that, got to be out, and we are doers naturally as founders, right? We want to build the thing. But I think that when you can just sit quietly with yourself to be able to truly understand what is it that I want, what is my purpose, that will always serve you, and you will live a fulfilled life.
Betsy, thank you very much for doing this with me. I really enjoyed this conversation. I can't wait to read the book. I haven't had a chance yet, but I will read
Yay!
it. It's right there. It's a beautiful cover. I'm gonna read that book, and I'm excited for it.
Thank you so much, David.
Awesome. Well, for those of you listening, I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please share this out with your networks, and we'll see you for the next episode of Not Another CEO Podcast. That's a wrap for this week's episode of Not Another CEO Podcast. Thanks for joining. For show notes and more, please visit notanotherceopodcast.com. We'll see you next week.